My name is Kevin. I'm a third-year medical student here at the University of Wisconsin. Tom, thanks so much for being with me here today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks.
All right, so let's just go ahead and get started with Tom. Tell us a little about yourself. Tell us who you are.
Sure. Well, Tom, Farley, I grew up here in Madison, longtime Madison family, and you had five siblings in our family, an older sister, and then three of us. The middle child being my brother Chris, who was very well known around here. But we grew up in Madison, and I went off to college on the East Coast. I went to Georgetown and stayed out there for like almost 17 years, raised three kids up through middle school and worked in banking and did all sorts of kind of marketing. I was a marketing professional. And then, and then, had a lot of fun when Chris was with me in New York when he was at SNL. And then, Chris obviously died tragically of a drug overdose. And, my life just kind of took a kind of really interesting shift then. I knew I wanted to go out into schools and talk about Chris's story. So I started doing that for a number of years. I ran the Chris Farley Foundation, trying to do more prevention work. Gradually got into some recovery and treatment work. In the process, moved my family back here to Madison. This is kind of my territory. It's my did a lot of work here, kind of talking to the same environments that Chris and I grew up in. So I kind of understood Wisconsin pretty well. And still tried to maintain a marketing career, professional career, but I kept getting pulled into this advocacy role, I guess. And all these years later, 25 years later, after Chris passed away, I find myself working for a mental health and substance abuse treatment organization, now actually getting people help. In the process, my own personal journey was interesting. I had many years where I, didn't drink, and I thought that was enough. I had put together 5 years of sobriety, and then I'd always flip back, and we'll get into more of this later. But it would always kind of have this roller coaster. Years of sobriety, and then back at it, and then years again. And then this last time, about 4 years ago, I decided I wanted to, get sober again. But I was started to do the same thing I did before, just not drinking and staying away from, kind of trigger, environments. And but something took, and I started going to meetings and really getting into recovery, and that's just made a huge difference in my life. And it really I came to realize that it wasn't just about being sober. It was really about the sobriety giving you the clarity to actually do the real work in recovery, which is what I've been doing. And now, instead of talking about somebody else's addiction, somebody else's story, meaning my little brother Chris's, now I incorporate my story in, and it audiences are a lot more responsive. It's a little bit more authentic, and that's been really amazing. So it's been quite a journey.
Well, thanks for sharing all that. That was
Yeah.
a whole lot,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate it. So, the first question I have is, how many years or how much time have you been sober currently?
Currently, my sober date is October 29th. So coming up in a little over a month, 2 months, it'll be 4 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks.
That's really impressive. Tell me a little bit more about the transition from talking about Chris's life to your life, and how that all began and your experience with that.
Well, it's interesting because it was just mostly, I focused, on Chris's and his struggles and trying to kind of you know, I would bring in some similarities. I would try to connect, Chris's story to my audiences, namely people here in Wisconsin, saying that, yeah, we grew up in a very similar environment that everyone else is still, it's still the same. Wisconsin's, culture is still the way it was when we were growing up. So I would make those connections. But and I really, lessons learned, things like that. But the difference was, and I left a lot off the table. Obviously I left my story off the table, and Chris and I had, some of the, we grew up kind of acquiring some of the same, let's call them traumas, um, that affected our addictions, drinking. And but I didn't go there. I talked about the family history. I talked about being Irish. I talked about, being from Wisconsin, but there was a lot more depth that I could have gone into all those years. So I didn't do that. I didn't know and really that much until I work in the field. I really didn't know much about traumas per se. So I've really, um, talking about my journey. I can talk about that because it's my own. I can talk about it very openly. I may, honestly, maybe all these years talking about Chris gave me the comfort level to go out into audiences and talking about, recovery and addiction, and with somebody else as the focus. So when it came time for me to talk about my issues, I was already there. I wrote a book, on mostly about Chris's, struggles, but all, family issues and stuff. So I had kind of acquired all the um skill sets and comfort levels that I needed to then address my issues. So that was very helpful. Um, and something that's really new is that I never talked about. I talked about, Chris's struggles. I talked about my struggles. But I've just now even incorporated what it's like to be a family member with somebody has an addiction issue. What's it like to be, a sibling? How has that affected me throughout my life, and what's it like to actually then lose somebody to this disease. So all those things have really, uh they're not part of it, not because it's, from my eyes. I'm not telling somebody else's story. It's like, okay, this is how it affected me, this is how it affected me in my drinking, as all those things. So it's been interesting. It's been an interesting 4 years.
You mentioned an important point, that it is a disease. And I think that's something that I want to touch upon and I want to highlight. There's a lot of stigma around abuse and use and recovery and being labeled as an addict of any kind.
Yeah.
But really, it is a disease that we should, as a society, be working towards treating. And I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, and the thing is that even, however you want to, label it or think about it, the thing with the stigma is that it's preventing people from healing. And don't you want that from, the people around you in your community? Don't you want them to be healthy? Forget about why, or who's to blame or whatever. It's like these are people trying to get, healthy and be a part of a contributing part of a family, of a community. So why wouldn't you want that? Why would you put up barriers? So uh that really, I think, you know uh, that's one of the things with stigma is calling it for what it is, and what its effect is on just on us personally. By you putting up a barrier, by you clinging to a stigma, you're making the world you have to live in, the community you have to live in, harder.
Absolutely. I couldn't
Yeah.
agree more. I guess while we're on this topic of barriers and stigma, tell me about maybe some of the barriers that you faced when initially trying to get on this path towards recovery.
Oh, well, just it was just my own thinking. Just the barriers were just all the societal stuff. All the I always struggled with kind of what my place is in the world. Like I always looked at like where I need to be. I was always looking at um what's preventing me from being successful as a as an employee, as a father, as a spouse, all those things. And I was always looking externally. And so the biggest barrier was my own thinking. You know, I got in my way all the time. And um, it was the first time I heard the words in a meeting, rigorous honesty. And I'm like, wow, wouldn't that be nice to live a life, because I knew what it's like to live a life in the opposite way. I'm Irish. I'm a marketing professional. I know how to craft a story, especially when it's about me. And I know how to make it look beautiful. And then social media came along later in my life and made it so much more easier to curate this wonderful life that I have. And it was just the absolute opposite of rigorous honesty. And when you start doing that, when you start going down that road and living in that space, um, you feel it internally. This is not right. You're not really that person. And combine that with the fact that I was always trying, for the longest time, my official name was Tom Farley, brother of Chris Farley, who died of a drug overdose. That was my official name every time I was introduced. So I had to be that person. I had to kind of create this, Tom Farley, the brother of Chris Farley, kind of thing, and I lost myself. And so the whole thing of rigorous honesty allowed me to stop presenting to the world this person that wasn't really me, and really find out, who who I who this person really was, and do I even like that person? So, yeah, for me, it was kind of blasting through um, that barrier of being of dishonest. And um, yeah, I think that was the big one. It just I just had to. I was so focused externally on like what people thought of me, what people expected of me. And once I gave that up, once I just that the whole serenity prayer of you know grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I mean, I once I like realized that there's so much in this world that I can't, as hard as I try, I cannot change it. But I can control me. I can when I just worked on what I could do, it made life so much more simpler, and I could achieve so much more. That so those were the big barriers for me.
Yeah, I get that this idea of honesty and being honest to ourselves is really hard to do in society, and especially like you touched upon with the social media. People really just present the highlights of their life. Nobody sees the lowlights of like to call
Right.
them. And so, sort of this with regards to the honesty, how exactly did you get to that? Was it one day you just woke up and realized, hey, I need to be different? Or how did you work towards
Yeah.
becoming more honest with yourself?
Well, it really helps. The thing is, this is, as we all know, this is a disease of isolation. Whether it's, mental health or whether it's substance abuse, these are all diseases of isolation. The person that's experiencing these things, is in extreme isolation. And understanding that is the first thing. The other side of that coin is that healing cannot take place in isolation. It requires connection. Um, and so I distinctly remember, I had, because I had been in this advocacy role for so long. I knew a lot of people in the recovery community, and I remember speaking to a really good friend of mine, clinician, that runs a clinic here in town that I used to do some work with, speak with her. I used to go and speak to the teen groups. And she called me up one day and she said, I hadn't seen her in a long time. And like, how you doing? I'm like, great. And I proudly tell her that I haven't had a drink in 4 months. And she's like, oh, that's wonderful. Like, let's grab coffee and get back together. And I said, wonderful, let's do that. And she goes, great. Well, why don't you meet me Saturday morning, 9 a.m. in the basement of the Presbyterian Church? I'm like, oh, you are good. Okay. You want me to go to a meeting? All right. But I trusted this person. I didn't know it, but I needed somebody that I trusted, that accepted me, that didn't, never looked at me as somebody's brother, whatever. They just accepted me. And so, which are the other two pillars that I realized I needed, was acceptance and trust, along with honesty. So once I felt that trust and acceptance with this person that I knew, I said, okay, I said yes. And I went. And it wasn't pretty at first. I would go to meetings, and it was very hard for me to stop the voice in my head, wanting to comment. My whole life I had been in a classroom or a corporate setting, in a meeting, disrupting, always talking to the person next to me or making a comment. And so I had to sit there, and listen. And uh, uh and that was interesting too. It taught me, um all of these, new emotions, and concepts like trust and acceptance. So yeah, it was just, and I had gone to AA meetings before, but this was different. I just knew I needed to behave differently and listen, so um and unfortunately it took me a long time, but I finally got there. So the interesting thing was, though, that when I went to meetings in previous years, my barometer was always drinking. It was very easy for me to look around a meeting room and say, well, that person drinks more than me. I did it in my own family. Even with Chris, I'm like, I don't have a problem because Chris is worse. There was always somebody that's how I measured people. Or I look at somebody that's like, that person drinks and takes drugs. It's like, I'm good, I'm fine. And that was my barometer. And then this last time sat, I listened, not really about, you know, what 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 their drinking history was. I started to think like, I'd listen to people and would go, wow, I think like that. Yeah, that's how I process stuff. Those things started coming out. It wasn't about drinking, it was about, how I process things, how I thought about things. And that made a huge difference, when I realized that, um, you know, drinking was just, a cloud that was getting in the way of me really working on the stuff I need to work on. And the only way I can do that, the only way I can work on that stuff, is to stay sober. That I know. um but uh yeah, it was very eye-opening.
The follow-up question I have with regards to that is really just the last point you mentioned, is how the drinking created a cloud for you to work on some of the other things that are hiding beneath that cloud. And I imagine that you're talking about the interplay between mental health and drinking. And so I guess, what exactly, going into that a little further, like what issues did you uncover when you became sober that you needed to work on?
Well, it just, this was just stopped me cold in my tracks. I was, because I'm known as a public speaker, a motivational speaker. I get asked to do a lot of these things. And the first time, I maybe was a year into recovery, and I was working at where I work now at Rosecrans, and they were doing a seminar. COVID had just started, so they did a virtual retreat for alumni, and they had all these clinicians talking, and I was kind of the last person I was going to talk about, whatever. um, bring on the clowns. So that was my role. um, but I was listening, and this one clinician was talking about trauma, and to me, I always thought, okay, trauma. I know what trauma is. Your life's going this way, and then something happens, and now it's going this way, and which is true for the most part for the big T trauma stuff. But she was talking about these other little traumas that build up inside and create, you know, um, all sorts of things, anxieties, and well, the reasons why we drink. And by the time it got to me later in the day, I had my kind of whole kind of speech kind of prepared, and I just kind of went to everyone on that retreat call. I'm like, I got to take a time out here. I got to talk about this. I go, I'm just realizing this for the first time that, um, do you know what trauma was in my family? It was the first time I really kind of saw, the traumas that I kind of had been growing up with. Trauma in the Farley family was that we really only had one emotion that we used for everything, literally everything. You can imagine what that was. It was humor. We laughed at everything. So, and as I talk about all the time, like if somebody was, upset, we laughed. If somebody fell and hurt themselves, we laughed. Not to be mean, but we just didn't like people in pain. So we thought our humor could kind of bring them out of it for some reason. So when somebody was, stressed out, we laughed. If somebody was angry, we definitely we definitely laughed. And if somebody was experiencing joy, we laughed, which is not the same thing. It was our one go-to emotion we used for everything. When the positive side is all three of my brothers and now my son have used that skill to be professional comedic actors. So I guess there's some silver lining, but for the most part, that's all we did, and we dealt with that for everything, and we so this coping mechanism to deal with all of our pain became a trauma. Um, and actually, it produced, we got good at another emotion, and that was when the reaction we were getting wasn't what we wanted or expected. When we laughed at something, and people like we're still in pain or still angry, or possibly even angrier, then we would get frustrated and angry. So we would ping pong between these two like weird emotions, and so, you know, that caused a lot of train wrecks, in relationships throughout my life until I got into literally until I got into recovery and started, exploring that there's a lot more emotions. The first time somebody said, like, do a gratitude journal, I'm like, gratitude? Like, I'm not grateful about, I'm like, literally, I'm not grateful of anything. It was so hard for me. It still is because I never developed that emotion, to understand and recognize those moments that I should be grateful for. So I'm that's a work in progress, and I'm still but I'm so grateful that I'm able to see that as a useful tool. That humility, grace, all these things that recovery teaches us are new things for me. Right? We just had that one. So yeah, that was great. And the wonderful thing about it is, you know, I always thought, somebody asked me in a podcast the other day, it's like, did you had this family, experience, like, were you a better father than your dad? Did you try to do better? And I'm like, I tried. Was I? No, I still did the same stuff. I was still that dad that teased, my kids because they were afraid of the dark, because that's all I knew. I knew how to make them laugh, and it didn't work. And um, so when looking back, I'm like, no, I probably was not as as better as I wanted to be or thought I was. But the thing is, now in recovery, I go back to, my kids are all in their 20s and 30s, but I'm able to make those amends, that were taught as part of the one of the 12 steps, and I make it in those kind of things, like, I wish I had done this. I'm sorry I didn't, and they're responding. And all of a sudden, this relationship, these kids that had gotten to their mid 20s And I thought, like, I don't have, like, now they're adults and they're out of, they're like off to the, the coasts, and like now I don't have the ability to be, to correct things and be a better dad. And but I do. Recovery gave me that um that ability and that skill set to do that. So now I'm going back and doing that, and my kids are responding. um People in my life, they're seeing that difference, and like it's amazing to me that I'm not intentionally trying to go out and, you know um rebuild relationships or mend fences and all that kind of stuff. I'm just trying to be a better me, and it's almost like a magnet. People are responding. It's I'm finally that person they always wanted me to be. And recovery, um I couldn't have done it any other way. And so that's one of the beautiful benefits of being in recovery. That whole concept of it, life doesn't get, you know any less harder. um you still have, things that are difficult, but it does get easier. There's no question. I'm making my life easier because I'm not, you know um putting stress on relationships anymore. I'm just dealing with I don't expect the people in my life to be these people or do this thing. I just need to be me. So
Oh, that's really terrific. I'm really glad that you've been given or earned these skills and on developing yourself. Sort of, you never got a chance. It sounds like you never got a chance to really develop any of these
mhm.
emotions or coping mechanisms, and now you do, which seems to have made a profound difference in your
A
life.
profound, well, because these emotions, if you will, or these are the keys to connection. I'm realizing. And when I now I talk about this in my presentations and talks all the time, is, the thing is, especially post COVID, what we've learned is that we desperately need that connection. We as humans are hardwired for connection. We can't, we're not supposed to exist any other way but to connect. And COVID certainly taught us that. One of the blessings I talk about at COVID is that the whole world suddenly felt what that disconnection and isolation feels like. And the thing is, there are people in our societies, in our communities, sometimes even in our families, that have felt like that and feel like that every day of their lives. The rest of the world, they felt that for and experienced that for 18 months, 2 years, and they were like starting fights in Walmarts and getting kicked off of planes. I mean, it's crazy. And they're like, we hate this. I'm like, yeah, well, there are people that's an everyday thing. And so that's why connection is so key. And the key to that is these motions and how you look at yourself, and how you um just focus on um being that better person. And it's not trying to create connections. It's really uh welcoming them and being able to receive them, and draw them in. And that's yeah, that's I'm experiencing, I'm seeing it.
I'm glad you talked about the connection. I was going to sort of circle back to a point that you had mentioned earlier about feeling isolated, which goes hand in hand with connection. And you had that one clinician that told you to go to the basement of the Presbyterian church. For someone who is currently, addicted to any substance and feels this isolation, what tips would you have to get them connected with someone or just really start their path to recovery?
I would say two things. Well, first of all, and again, one of the blessings of COVID, again, another one is that now we can do like what we're doing now virtually. We can go anytime, any place, anywhere, and connect. And it was one of those. It's the first thing that hit me during COVID, is when I was forced into this isolation, is that I could go on any day and go to a meeting and connect, even though it was just on my recovery um, drinking and addiction, even though it was just focused on that kind of topic, I was still connecting. And that was, and I could do that, anonymously if I wanted to. I've got a group that I meet down in Illinois still on a Wednesday night. I've never met them, but they're now my, like, really my home group. I miss them when I don't get into a meeting with them. So I mean, it's and the thing is, what recovery has taught me is what it feels like to be connected. So when I go to a meeting and I connect with, my recovery community, even though it's very one-sided, I'm feeling what it feels like to be accepted, trusted, heard. Um, uh, and the goal isn't to remain in that community. The goal is to understand what this connection feels like, even in this small little corner of my world, and to now I'm able to and feel comfortable to go out into the real world and seek that or provide that connection to others. And when I don't feel that same kind of level of trust and acceptance, I know that's now my trigger. That's my barometer. I like, okay, this isn't a good place for me to connect. This isn't a good crowd, and I should probably, go somewhere else and leave, or the old Irish exit. I'm very good at that. So so I mean, but but the thing is, um and I, if I step away from that recovery community, I lose it real quickly. That's why it's so key for me to remain connected to my recovery community, because it teaches me what connection feels like and how to connect and how to bring people in and how to connect with others, so that I can go out into the rest of the world and do the same thing there. But I that's my rock. That's my I need that constant affirmation and reminder, and to understand what that feels like, because the way my mind processes stuff, the longer I step away from that, it's amazing how quickly one can go back to, that person lurking that wants to get out, that's, not living, honestly, and all that kind of stuff. So
So it sounds like to me that connection is very much like almost like a skill. Like if you don't use it, you lose it. That
yeah,
you need to continuously be working on that.
absolutely, absolutely. And the beautiful thing about it is, I look at it, I look at it through like like my brothers, like with an actor's eye. My brothers were all trained, and I talk about this all the time. My brothers were all trained at Second City in improv, and they weren't stand-up comics. They were this, improv, and there were masters at creating the ensemble, where everyone's voice and style is different, but everyone matters. That is a true connection. There's trust, there's acceptance, and they're trying to create humor, but the at its core, it's this ensemble, this connection. And I'm constantly trying to find, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's, socially, or or even in the recovery community, trying to find that perfect ensemble, that uh that connection at its finest. And when people leave the ensemble or people come in, it's not disrupted, because everyone kind of operates on the same way. I can go on and on about improv and ensembles, but that to me is the perfect definition of connection. And so I use my acting siblings and son as a great reminder of how um, connection can really benefit um, all of us.
Yeah, it surely can. Regardless of who you are. I think it's like you mentioned. It's part of being human. We need that connection.
Yeah.
The sort of to wrap up here, the last question I've got for you is really, it sounds like you've devoted your life to this connection and really helping others on their path toward recovery. Tell me about some of the plans that you've got for yourself in the future or any of the organizations that you work for.
Well, yeah, thank you. As I said, I love that I've kind of found my lane. For so long I was trying to, I got to be a business person. I was, had all the, went to business school, and I, studied all this stuff, and I got to do this, and I was doing this other, you know, um, uh, um, prevention and recovery kind of stuff on the sidelines. But that was a passion, and it took me a long time, but now I finally found that this is the lane I should be in. And again, and the thing is, it's all about my skill is communication and messaging, and connecting to audiences, and spreading that word. Whether it's to reduce stigma, or to just open doors for people, one at a time, or as a group. So I feel that I'm finally where I need to be. I'm I was, even when I did the Chris Farley Foundation, I kind of felt like I was on my own. I was definitely in isolation, and now I'm working for a healthcare organization that's 100 years of recovery work and treatment down in Rockford at Rosecrans. And I'm like, this is where I need to be. So I'm actually getting people into recovery, but on the same token, I'm still doing my messaging and advocacy work. And I love being up here in Wisconsin, and kind of doing what I can wherever I can for whoever wants me to deliver those messages like I'm doing now. And um, this is, I feel like this is what I'm good at, and this is what I do. So I love that. As far as kind of the industry goes, you know, treatment and the clinical side of things, that's always going to be kind of the base. But I love this new um, foray into peer recovery and peer, talk about connection. Like, yeah, finally we're getting, we're not, we're helping each other, and that the whole kind of peer-to-peer stuff, I don't know where it's going to go, but it's out there, it's growing, it's getting, there's form around it, and that's really exciting. I think the future, I think it's kind of that missing piece that we didn't have. We had great treatment and clinical stuff, and we had the support groups, the AAs and things like that. This is that kind of middle, that missing piece, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. And again, that's what Connection's all about. So that'll be fun to see where that goes, and I'm looking to support that wherever I can.
That's terrific. I really hope that sounds like a terrific initiative. I really hope to see that sort
Yeah,
of take off, that peer connection. That's definitely vital.
totally. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your time today. I don't want to take up any more. I think we could sort of take this
Yeah.
discussion for hours and hours, and you're a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate you taking the time to give your story, provide some advice to those who might need it the most, and really just being here today.
I appreciate it, Kevin. Yeah, it is. Yeah. There's a lot of great, a lot of great effort out there. So, yeah, I'd love to. I'm just happy that I'm, when they say call it, voice of recovery, it's like, yeah, I'm happy that I'm, you know, a voice, So
Please just keep doing your thing.
yeah, I do like the attention. I'm kidding. No, that's nothing. That's um no, it feels good. And there's nothing like, seeing somebody that, you know, there was no hope. There's, there was there they didn't think that there was any value, you know, that they had in society. And then, you see people in recovery, and it's amazing. There's nothing like seeing somebody, come out, the other side, and um as I said, it's not that they won the lotto, and everything's going great, but you see it in their face. A person in recovery, still struggles, with life. There's, but um, uh, it's a difference, and there's nothing like that. There's, it's just making us all stronger. The more people we have, uh, healthy, and we're not losing, you know, some really amazing people. So anymore. So it's all good stuff.
It's terrific. It's that internalization, I think, is what you're talking about here. We can, as healthcare professionals,
Mhm.
motivational speakers, we can tell anyone that they're great, they're intelligent, they're worth, their lives are worth something. But until they internalize that, that's when we see the real change.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I saw that with my brother all the time. People said, "Oh, you're so funny, you're so funny," and his reaction was always, "Really, you think so?" I mean, and he was, to everyone externally, like, Chris Farley was like one of the funniest, people around, but he never believed it because he didn't. But when he got into recovery, there was this moment when I was in New York with him, those 3 years when he exploded, became really funny. It's when he was working his recovery, and he started to believe that it wasn't about his humor, it was just him. It was about his happiness and the way he felt about himself, and it was it was amazing to see.
Well, hopefully we can continue to create those sorts of changes in our society moving
Yeah.
forward. That's really all
And
we can ask for.
I felt that way myself too. Exactly. I do the same way. I understood Chris a lot more, um, when I went through that same process. So it's all it's fun stuff. It's really good. It's really positive, amazing stuff that that happens in recovery.
Well, Tom, I hope you continue to spread that positivity. We surely need it in our society, in Madison, just
Yeah.
all around. Once again, I appreciate you being here and taking the time to really talk with me and spread awareness. It's been great.
Awesome. Totally enjoyed it. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it.
You have a good one.
Thanks. You too.